I believed from the beginning that a defining feature of modern geopolitics is the competition between the U.S. and China. And I thought it was my responsibility to play a central role in the design and execution of our China strategy and in the management of the U.S.-China relationship. His kind of overall thesis that America's run by lawyers, of which
you're the archetype, right?
Of which I am one, and China's run by engineers. There's a truth to that. I spoke with her about going to Taipei, and she basically said to me, "Oh, you White House is Democrat, Republican, like." You're all too restrained. I should be able to do what I want to do, and nobody should tell us whether we can go to a city and so forth. I believe that the cost to Taiwan of that visit far exceeded the benefit to Taiwan of that visit. So,
你正在看的是美国前国家安全事务助理、拜登政府对华战略的核心设计者之一杰克沙利文于2025年11月18日在播客 China Talk 上的一次对话。在这场访谈中，沙利文直言佩洛西访台成本高于收益，同时也在一定程度上认同了今年因新书出版而广受讨论的判断，胡佛研究所学者王丹所提出的观点：美国是律师治国，而中国是工程师治国。在他看来，中美竞争具有明显的结构性特征，但冲突并非宿命。真正值得警惕的不是竞争本身，而是操作环境失控所带来的系统性风险。
What were the things that you decided you needed to own in order and drive personally very aggressively, and why did you make those calls?
Well, first, I felt I was unusual as a national security advisor in that I thought I had to be at the table as an advocate, a designer, and to a certain extent an implementer of domestic industrial policy, because I thought it was important that we have the national security perspective on that we be pushing that forward on chips, on clean energy, on infrastructure. So that was one thing that I put a lot of effort into, particularly in the first 2 years. Second, I thought the intersection of technology and national security was going to be defining. And so we created from whole cloth a new directorate on technology and national security. And I saw it as my responsibility to stay on top of that set of issues. Yes, semiconductor export controls, but also other areas, biotech, quantum, and as I mentioned before, the clean energy transition. And then third, I believed from the beginning that a defining feature of modern geopolitics is the competition between the U.S. and China. And I thought it was my responsibility to play a central role in the design and execution of our China strategy and in the management of the U.S.-China relationship. So those were areas that I felt, regardless of what else was going on anywhere else in the world, I had to be focused on. And tied to all of those, industrial policy, technology policy, U.S.-China, were allies. And that meant husbanding and stewarding our relationships with core allies, the G7 plus, India, Korea, Australia, in addition to the G7. And I put a lot of thought, energy, and effort into trying to elevate those relationships so that they were in the strongest possible state. I think you've had Dan Wang on your podcast, right? So he wrote this book, Breakneck, which I thought was just incredibly thought-provoking, interesting. And his kind of overall thesis that America's run by lawyers, of which
you're the archetype, right?
Of which I am one, and China's run by engineers. There's a truth to that, and I would say democratic administrations are even more run by lawyers. Now, I don't think in the role of national security advisor, the kind of challenge of being a lawyer manifested the way other kind of elements of the government did, meaning it would have been great to have more freedom of maneuver to actually just build at speed and scale than we were able to accomplish, because we had every conceivable obstacle to being able to do that. That's true from the defense industrial base to infrastructure to building a semiconductor fab in Arizona.
Sure.
So that would be one area where more freedom of maneuver, more capacity to move fast would have helped. That's one. Two, the U.S. is funny. We're the richest country on the planet, deep in liquid capital markets, a massive federal budget, and yet our ability to mobilize capital in an intentional way to serve national security ends, both domestically and globally, is wanting. And so I would have loved more freedom of maneuver to be able to offer a value proposition to the countries of the Global South for building infrastructure and competing with the Belt Road Initiative. And it was hard to even get nickels and dimes to be able to do that. And I think that was maddening because for pennies on the dollar, I think we could have competed more effectively and can to this day compete more effectively. And we're not doing it because we can't get that money.
You've seen the arc, man. You were present at the creation of the Xi era. What I don't know. What do you believe about him that's not consensus?
Oh, what do I believe about him that's not consensus? That's interesting. I think he is more improvisational than the kind of theory that he's just set out a coherent strategy that they are just going to execute. And he's like basically any other leader of any other big unruly country, and that he's got to make a lot of stuff up as he goes along.
Accidental conflict. It's something Americans worry about. I personally am skeptical that like if two countries really don't want to fight, they can trip into a war neither side really wants. Am I wrong here? Is this something I should be more scared of?
I think it's such a fair question. It's almost like a shibboleth of like the risk of mistake, miscalculation, escalation, the ships bumping into each other in the South China Sea, and all of a sudden you're in World War III. I share a degree of your skepticism. I think that there are restraining factors that can allow disengagement and de-escalation. But let me give you a hypothetical scenario, and you tell me if it worries you or you're like, they'd work it out. It's just fine. So as you know, the PRC is pressing closer and closer to the island of Taiwan in the air and on the sea, bumping up against, fewer and fewer nautical miles offshore, right? And they're doing that with manned aircraft, they're doing it with ships, they're doing it with drones. At some point, let's just say Taiwan says, we can't tolerate this anymore. We got to go like fire a warning shot, or we got to go, do a fake dogfight with one of these planes to show them that we're not tolerating the continued encroachment. And then one thing leads to another, and those two planes splash down. You think next day it's cool? Or does that bother you? Does that worry you? Because that scenario do I think automatically we're off to the races? No, but that kind of scenario in an already unstable environment, operational environment, I don't know, that the risk of a tactical mistake leading to a change in the strategic situation, I'm not like at one end of the spectrum on this that you're pushing against, but I'm not quite where you are, I don't think.
Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be a nice thing. You lose some sleep over it.
Yeah.
But,
and that's kind of, the thought experiment to me is that like, why would you lose sleep over? Because you'd be like, well, there is a possibility now. Maybe not that immediately the invasion force comes flowing over the horizon, but rather that it leads to a change in the national conversation on the mainland. It leads to arguments that we just can't tolerate this. There has to be punishment, and so on. And yes, can that contribute to a shift in a negative direction that raises the risk of outright conflict? I think it can. I don't want to overstate the case because I take your point, but that kind of scenario worries me more in a way than the U.S. and China bumping up against each other. India-Pakistan's another example where I think mistake can lead to very rapid escalation. So to me, it's a little bit more condition specific than just sort of in the abstract.
But isn't the lesson of the most recent India-Pakistan almost the other thing? It's like, okay, we have a game now, and we just play it every 5 years.
Yeah. Actually,
it probably doesn't feel like that if you're getting woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
You know what? I'll take that point. I think that's fair because I basically agree with you that at the end of the day, the two sides don't want to go to all-out war, and so there's reasons for them to end up not doing so. So I withdraw the India-Pakistan example.
Was it a mistake for Pelosi to go to China?
To China?
Yeah. Jesus.
I'm going to, look, I want to be fair to the Speaker Emerita, give her her airtime.
She's declined her invitation, for the record. But
I went up and, no, I'm saying I'm going to give her airtime right now.
Okay.
Right. So because I'm going to answer your question. but I don't, I want to do it in a fair way. I spoke with her about going to Taipei, and she basically said to me, all you White House is Democrat, Republican, like you're all too restrained. I should be able to do what I want to do, and nobody should tell us whether we can go to a city and so forth. So she was pretty clear and direct in her view. I believe that the cost to Taiwan of that visit far exceeded the benefit to Taiwan of that visit. So for me, it's pretty simple calculus.
How so?
Well, I think it led to not just an immediate reaction by China that put a huge amount of pressure on Taiwan, but it led to a change in the operational environment around Taiwan that has not gone back to the way it was before. So substantive changes in Taiwan's immediate environment to the negative. On the positive side, kind of what? Some symbolism, I guess.
Trump, too, does not seem to see China as the threat that you guys, and Trump 1 seemed to characterize it as. Two questions fall out of that. Like, to what extent do you think if he really tries, he can change the tenor of this relationship? How structural is the competition, basically? And, given that this is what they're seeing, is there, if you had foresight into this, is there any, would the bias have been to push harder or push less hard?
Oh, second's a good question. And I think increasingly it's going to be a salient question because I think we are going to see more swings in U.S. foreign policy in the years ahead. So future national security advisors will have to contemplate dramatic departures one way or the other. And we're kind of seeing that play out, the lessons of that right now. On the first question, here's what I think. I think it's structural. I think the United States and China are two big, ambitious, dynamic countries with proud people who want to succeed and, frankly, don't want someone else calling the shots or having undue influence or having greater capacity than they have. And we have two different political systems, two different value systems, and therefore I think competition is a feature of the relationship. What I don't think is structural is that it has to be conflict. Where I think we have the ability to influence things is to manage that competition effectively. But I think the idea that you can just wish the competition away and go with win-win peaceful coexistence and all these kinds of phrases, I don't really buy that. And frankly, I don't think China buys that deep down. So I think President Trump can talk about the G2, and I completely agree. He looks at this through an economic lens, a mercantilist lens, and not a lens of strategic competition. But at the end of the day, I think these structural factors will shine through. I have to think about whether it would have made us do something different. That's a bit of a mind bender, projecting back and then forward. But it's a totally reasonable question.